What's up, Dylan? How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Enjoying the summer. How about yourself?
Doing good. Trying to enjoy the summer as well. So yeah, but you're correct me if I'm wrong, but you're an American who lives in the UK.
I'm a Canadian who
Canadian.
lives in the
Oh,
UK.
sorry to offend you like that. Uh,
Actually, to be fair, I am also American.
okay.
I have American citizenship, but I was born and raised in Toronto, so yeah.
Oh, got it. Nice city. But I guess for summers, Europe and the UK they do things a bit differently than they do over here. You take breaks and go on. I guess it's called holiday. So.
Yeah, we have a bit of a bit of a better culture about work-life balance. Not as good as Central Europe and the mainland,
Mm.
as you probably know, but we still like to enjoy what sunlight we get in London.
Yeah. How long you been there?
About 5 years now. So I came over to do my master's in public policy, where I did a lot of election analytics work.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah, so kind of like that whole Cambridge Analytica, that type of vibe. So uh, figuring out when a person votes strategically in an election in both Canada and the UK, and then I transitioned from election analytics to data consulting. And I've always done strategy consulting, but I didn't do data consulting. So I did digital twins and simulation consulting for Deloitte for a few years, and then I moved full on into data strategy. So it's been about 5 years now in the UK, and full on, that's kind of where my data career started and accelerated in a lot faster trajectory.
Interesting. We'll dive more into the nuance of that in a bit. I guess to back up for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. So Dylan Anderson, so I'm a lead data strategy consultant, and my main focus is data strategy. And data strategy in my mind is setting the roadmap and setting up the data office for any organization. It's really connecting the business and the data operations. So my tagline on LinkedIn is bridging the gap between data and strategy. And speaking of LinkedIn, my main kind of mode of contact and how Joe and I met is probably through LinkedIn and all those kind of events. But that's really where I talk about data, the impacts it has, how to think strategically about it, and how to think about data across the entire data ecosystem as well, which is something that I'm sure we'll talk about. So, yeah, that's a bit about me, but happy to dive into wherever we want.
Yeah, LinkedIn's an interesting place. There's a lot of data strategy conversations, and I think we may have actually had one when we met up in London, whenever I was there last. I think it was May.
Yeah,
Last year.
man.
Yeah, we get. I think it was at Chris Tabb's happy hour, over at a Q bar, which is kind of sad. The bartenders know be my name there now. But so.
Well, they know Chris a lot better, so
Oh, they know Chris. Yeah, they are definitely like very much a first name basis with Chris. So, um, but yeah, I think we had some good discussions there. And yeah, data strategy is one of these things where I feel like when I mentioned LinkedIn, because I feel like there's a lot of conversations on about data strategy on LinkedIn. Um, don't take this the wrong way, but I feel like a lot of these conversations seem very repetitive. Like they're every time I go on LinkedIn now, it feels like people are just talking about the same stuff. Like we need to align the business with data, and data needs a seat at the table, and data, um, needs to add value to the business, and all these kinds of conversations. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, um, if people are screaming this much, is data strategy, are people getting the traction they should be with data strategy, or is there something we're missing here?
probably not, honestly. I think it goes back to like one of your podcasts last year, I think with Chris Tab, when you two were riffing off uh, how everyone uses get business value from data and how that business value is just a buzzword and a term that is overused and I think it is. And I think data strategy is kind of approaching that territory as well because people will say anything's a data strategy if it kind of thinks about data strategically. But the problem with data strategy is it doesn't work unless it's implemented. And I
Yeah.
see a lot of great data strategy on paper, but they're not implemented properly because to implement it is really hard.
Give me an example of a good data strategy on paper.
A good data strategy on paper is something that sets the vision for what you want to do in data. It links it to the overall organizational strategy. And that's kind of bread and butter. That's the basics that even you were just talking about. But then it goes beyond that and it says, what are the use cases that we actually want to do with data? And use cases are more than just, okay, we're going to build this machine learning tool or this AI team. It's like we need to fix our data quality. We need to set KPIs and standardize our KPIs. And you have those buckets of use cases, maybe 12 to 20 of them, and you organize them by how you can actually deliver that. For example, you can't do the AI stuff until you standardize your use case, until you standardize your KPIs or something, right? It has to be a logical flow. And then you build an executional roadmap of how you actually deliver it. And that's the kind of change management implementation bit that needs to be done. And throughout that whole process, people need to be talked to across the organization. So both data stakeholders and business stakeholders, and having kind of that executive sponsorship the whole way through. So a good data strategy is all those things, which then kind of flows into how can we actually deliver on those things. Because if you just have recommendations on a PowerPoint or a piece of paper, you're not going to get anything done because no one's bought in and no one sees like that. Everyone's like, how are we actually going to do that?
Okay, so that's what a good data strategy looks like on paper, and I agree that that sounds amazing. My inclination is let's go do that right now. You've been doing data strategy work for a while, and what happens next, typically?
Would you want like what really happens next or what you would want to do next?
I don't like counterfactual or I think utopian visions and stuff. Give the audience an idea of what actually happens once this great data strategy on paper is brought to the business.
So typically, it depends if the client's invested or not. If they're not quite invested in the data strategy and they don't have their champions across the data teams, then the use cases are mapped out. The roadmap's mapped out, but there's no one to actually do it because they're busy with all their other things. Everyone has 100 things to do on their plate. So how can they add these two or three extra things from a data strategy perspective? And that will happen with probably about, I mean, I'm in consulting, that'll probably happen with 30 to 40% of clients, especially ones that have a burning platform, something else. So for example, I've done one with a firm that was about to do a migration. And after we did the data strategy, the migration took all the resources because that was the burning platform.
Yeah.
The other half, probably 50, 60%, they're bought in because they see the tasks they have to do in front of them as um as as spelled out in the data strategy, and they get extra resources for it. They have executive sponsorship, and so the head of data engineering, for example, is like, oh, I was going to do that anyway, I'm glad we're going to do that, and that will lead into this use case that we're going to build. So there's two kind of ways about it, and you really need that executive sponsorship, the buy-in from the business teams, because in a lot of these cases, the business teams end up funding some of this stuff, or they're the ones who actually get the sponsorship from the CIO or CTO to actually pay for new programs and such. So it's really about that kind of aligned and holistic perspective and way forward.
That's really interesting. That example you gave of other priorities that get in the way of a data strategy, like a migration, like that's no laughing matter. That's a huge undertaking. Why would somebody even talk about a data strategy in the midst of something like a migration, which is looming in the background? It's not like the migration suddenly sneaks up on you like you know, out of the blue. Like this is something hopefully people have been planning on. And maybe you can first answer that, and then I have a follow-up question, which is, um, would it be possible to sort of tag the data strategy along with the migration, perhaps, to achieve some sort of outcomes? So.
Yeah, I'll answer your first question. Or second question first is yes, you should. Like everything within the data strategy should take into consideration the major tasks that that organization is doing. So it should be involved in that, and that should go into decisioning about resources, about timelines, about execution ability. Um, on your first question is why would a company do a data strategy if they know that they'll have no resources to migration? Well, I think it goes to a bigger problem, especially within large organizations. And most of my clients are billions of dollars, billions of pounds in revenue and in market cap. And their data teams are 200 to 1,000 people, right? They're huge. Um, the problem is the data teams don't really talk to each other, right? So you'll have everyone's hearing about this migration in the analytics team, but they're not involved in it because that's all the data engineers doing it. So the analytics team wants to build these new dashboards. They want to do all these new kind of tricks and tools, and maybe they want or they've got tasked with to do AI by the CEO. But meanwhile, the data engineering team is focused on this migration because they're changing platforms and what have you. And the coordination, it really isn't there between the two heads of the heads of data engineering and the heads of analytics or what have you. And th because there's a lack of understanding about how one domain and discipline flows into the other. And I think that's a pervasive problem within data right now. And it makes us look like we're not doing things when we are doing things, but we're not talking to each other and we're not coordinating in the way that you need to actually get things done.
Mm, there's a lot to unpack there. Um, I mean, you talk about these big companies with teams that don't talk to each other. I mean, I've seen this a lot. Um, and yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, just going by Conway's law, for example, which is companies will build systems according to the way it communicates. The systems themselves in these migrations, they're often siloed endeavors. And so, yeah, I can understand how this would go wrong. Diving a bit more into that topic of teams that don't talk to each other at big companies, what are some of the causes of that? Because you'd think that this is sort of fundamentally an issue that would get in the way of a data strategy. And, one would think that a company, especially these bigger ones that might have maybe a chief information officer or a chief data officer or even a CTO, chief AI officer, whatever CXO title you want to add to that. You would hope that things would be aligned across teams, but they often aren't. And why do you think that is?
I think it comes down to two things. The first thing being a lack of operating model and an ill-created org structure. And I wrote about both these
Mm,
things in my newsletter, The Data Ecosystem.
yep.
And the reason, like, I see these things as fundamental of the how you do things. You need an org structure that allows data to enable other business departments to enable itself to work properly. And often that is kind of forgotten about, and companies just put data on the side as a silo, as just another department where it really does things differently than a lot of the other departments within the organization. And then the operating model as well is how do teams work together? What's that ways of working? What are the processes to enable and build these things? And those just don't really exist. I mean,
Mm,
I also did an article on the people, process, technology, and data framework. And I mean, the classic thing, and you've probably seen it all the time, Joe, is like leadership just likes to press the button on technology and just say that's the one we're going to go with. We're going to have the technology
yeah,
solve this, when really it's the processes that actually enable people. And then the second
yeah.
big thing, so that's the org structure and operating model, which I see as the biggest crux because it's the backbone of doing things. But the second big thing is a lack of cross domain experience. Um, like we have a lot of great experts in data across every domain. There's really good names in governance, engineering, like yourself, um, analytics, data science, AI, whatever it is. But people often don't talk about outside of those domains. And therefore, you
Yeah.
get data engineers, for example, who aren't thinking about the analytics or they're not thinking about the architecture. And these things, they're like, oh, that's not my job. And it becomes very black and white. Whereas, as we know, working in a data team is so gray. You're going to be doing a lot of things across different areas. And I think that lack of holistic thinking is really a barrier to progress for a lot of these teams.
Hmm.
And I mean it's why I love how you kind of transition from writing you transition from being a data scientist to writing the data engineering book to now doing a lot on data modeling because you're seeing like you know the throughways of it all. You know how interrelated and connected they are.
Yeah, and I feel like data modeling is one of these things where if you do it right, it ties you back to the business, because you are hopefully modeling data according to um, what happens in a business and how things flow. I think, as you say though, to give an example, like some people want to do technology and they want to push the magic button, and then technology happens, and that I think stunts the growth or the ability to do things like data modeling, among other things, architecture, governance, all those things uh, as well, because it's very myopically focused at that point, right? Where people are like, it's solely a technology solution, therefore, why bother talking to quote the business and understanding what they want, what they're looking for, how they're gonna, use what we're building and so forth. It happens all the time. It's just a shocking amount, and then data people are left kind of wondering like why do we always have these same conversations, with ourselves over 5 pints at the bar. Actually, 5 pints is pretty lightweight over in UK. 50
We're
pints
talking
at a
about modeling,
bar.
yeah.
Depending on the topic. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, so it's something I've always been thinking about, where data modeling is one, I decided to tackle that topic just because it seemed like bad data modeling, or I would say crappy data modeling, was really at the heart of a lot of issues that you would see, across the spectrum, whether it's analytics, even machine learning, especially in software engineering and the backend databases and so forth, and all sort of manifests itself downstream. That's just one thing that happens, right? But then it's kind
Yeah.
of like you can write a book about how to do people and processes, but it's like the people part is so damn hard. Um, but I'm glad you're writing about this stuff. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, the data modeling thing, like that's something I got into like a few months ago. I got really into it and read your stuff, read a lot of stuff out there, and one reason was because one of my clients they just had constant engineering issues, and I'm just like, you need a conceptual and logical data model to kind of explain to your data engineers what the business is about and what it does, because otherwise they're just building stuff for building stuff. They
yeah.
don't understand that you're trying to do this and get this many new customers because they don't know how you get customers. So if you build that kind of chain and then say like this is where the data enables it, then you save them a ton of bandwidth of having to learn about business because you're never going to get a lot. I bridge the gap between data and strategy, and like I understand
Right.
business, I understand data. But most people they understand data or they understand the business. So you really need to enable that bridge within organizations as best as possible. And I think that's where modeling comes in. And that's one reason why, I mean, it has kind of gone out of style because I think in a lot of people's minds, it's a physical modeling, it's a database type thing, and there's technologies that can do it for you. But in reality, it's a conceptual and logical and a bridge kind of thing as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, big time. And it feels like it went out of style for a lot of reasons. I think the cult of agile is a lot to blame with it, where it's just, iteration's nice, I would say, but iteration, for the sake of it, uh, is what I think you can definitely turn that into a convenient excuse to avoid doing the hard work, which data modeling is hard work. It's thinking. And so I don't know that like you can cram thinking into, well, then agile also became the equivalent of like 2 week sprints for a lot of companies. And so I think what I've been arguing is it's hard to cram deep thinking about your business into 2 week sprints. Like those two forces are, as much as you like to think you can do them, they're almost diametrically opposed, right? Where some
Yeah.
things just require time. And I feel like when we're doing the hard stuff, whether it's architecture, data modeling, whatever, it's the old, I think Warren Buffett said this, but it's like you're trying to do things against a certain organic flow, right? It's kind of like getting 9 women to make a baby in a month, right? And it just doesn't really work that way. Some things do take time, and that's kind of. But now everything's about speed and moving fast and being quote productive. but I think that in some ways we've gone quite backwards as an industry because we're not doing the hard things anymore. Because as you say, it's all about let's see how much we can cram in technology to solve the problem instead of actually just thinking through the problem we're trying to solve in the first place. So,
Yeah, and we keep adding stuff to it, right? Like
oh
data
yeah,
just keeps on growing, and like the use cases, the like advent of AI. I mean, everything we're just adding more and more to it, and it's just more and more short-term problems just get added to the mix, and we keep thinking, oh, we can solve that with more technology. And realistically, like I think companies that go back to the basics in a way and like kind of go back to thinking through this stuff more strategically, to your point, those are much better positioned to succeed in the long term because if you keep fighting these fires in a short with a short-term thinking guys on, you're never going to act, the problems are just going to reemerge.
oh yeah. As a data strategist, who I'm guessing part of your job is convincing the business that they need to do the right things. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's tough because especially like I think it gets tough even selling a data strategy and getting buy-in to be like, oh, you need to think about this strategically rather than just going X, Y, Z and doing these things. I think that the biggest proof point is kind of understanding their pain points. So one thing I do with every project is kind of that interview report that this is the foundation of where all your problems are at. You all know this stuff. You've said it to us. But here it is laid out. You have our issues with this, this, and this,
Hmm.
and this is what you need to start thinking about to solve those things. And I think that foundation really grounds people. And they're
Mm.
like, okay, yeah, we do. We actually do need to attack this and approach this and then you can kind of tackle some of those complicated questions. But the buy-in really comes from that self-realization that like actually we do have an issue, and because we have this issue, it's hindering everything else we're working on.
Mm.
And I think the biggest thing is everybody in organizations know it, and they talk about it over a couple of pints after work, but they don't spend any money or they don't actually institutionalized to fix it. And
Mm.
that's kind of where the data strategy comes in. And that's why you have to refresh the data strategy every 2 to 3 years. And especially as your organization evolves, things change, AI comes about. And you do see the difference between organizations who inherently understand that versus organizations who don't. And they're just firefighting for 5 years straight.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That is interesting because I mean, you point out that data strategy is sort of implicitly done over pints and a lot of commiserating, usually crying into your beer at the same time along with your coworkers. Or people call people like me and then they, then I'm their shoulder to cry on. It's interesting. But but then there's the data strategist that comes in. Is that typically a role that a company hires for, or like how does a company even figure out, walk me through the process of first gaining the insight to know you even need data strategy and to finding the person who can help guide that strategy?
Yeah, I'll start by saying it usually I mean I've seen it done internally. Sometimes there is a data strategy lead or maybe the CDO or the head of data is leading it. But because it's such a kind of complex and senior level thinking area, you don't see as many of them done internally. And then when they're done internally, they might not have the whole picture because it's that third part. You don't have that third party perspective that you need to kind of properly assess things, right? You come with the baggage. Um, but to be aware of it, I think a lot of it comes down to the executives above the CDO or the head of data being like, we actually need to use data more strategically because we've just wasted £1 million on this AI program that didn't work, right? And what are we doing with data? What are we doing with AI? I talked to a company who they called me because they wanted to do a data strategy. And the reason they wanted to do the data strategy is because they did an AI strategy. And the first recommendation for the AI strategy was do a data strategy first.
Okay.
Um, Yeah. So like companies don't really get that they need to think about data strategically. They just kind of do it. But then when they do it and they fail, then they start to realize, oh, we actually need to think about this more strategically because we're just spending money on very expensive engineering and science resources and not getting the bang for our buck.
Are you seeing that a lot these days? Because I know AI is, it's still red hot. It's the discussion that every company, um, you know, as far as I can tell, is just having in some way or another. How often do you see that where companies are just jumping straight into AI without considering the data?
Quite a bit. I think, yeah, quite a bit. I know a company that went head first in AI last year and recently closed down the whole program
Whoa.
because they didn't get the benefit that they thought they would. And I could have told them last year that it was gonna be a mistake because their data quality was very poor. And they
Mm,
weren't going to reap the benefits until they fixed that. But companies that like CEOs have bosses, and those bosses are shareholders, and the shareholders want AI, right? Until they don't. And I think that it's coming down now where companies are realizing we're not going to put money into this anymore. And
interesting.
then on the flip side, and I mean, I'm a consultant, but like you get all the big consulting firms saying, "Hey, let's do some Gen AI. Like, how about we stand up this POC for you, and how about we do this?" And I think that's again just it's baiting the fish again. Like it's not healthy, and it's distracting from how you should actually approach data and how you should approach AI. And AI is great. Like there's so many use cases, there's so many benefits, but it's not great if you don't approach it in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this number I remember seeing last month. It's from New York Times article. Like BCG, it's Boston Consulting Group, now derives a fifth of its revenue from AI, up from zero just a couple years ago. McKinsey expects 40% of its business to be AI related in the near future, whatever that means. I've heard this from big companies where these big consulting firms, maybe you work at one, come in and um,
No?
I mean, and it's what you do if you're a big company. You make your money off of selling um, dreams and services and lots of billable hours. And this isn't. It seems like a pretty easy target for because all you need to do is crank up the FOMO button and crank it to 11, and you scare the living daylights out of executives that if they're not doing AI, then they're going to be you know basically useless and obsolete very quickly. This is the sort of stuff I'm seeing and I'm hearing about it is these companies, these big consulting groups come in and just scare again just executive and boards into doing AI and then but there's a lot of money to be made with that. So I'm not
Yeah.
blaming them. I mean that's how markets work. That's how these companies get to be as big as they are. So management consulting, I'm looking, it's like in the United States alone, it's almost a $400 billion a year industry. So
Yeah. No, and it's the same at like currently I'm at Accenture and it's the same purview, right? That they want to drive AI because they see that as the growth engine. And I think
yep,
a lot of it is the hype and a lot of it is you jump on the train or you jump on the bandwagon when it passes by.
yep,
And I think I mean, I do have issue with that. Because personally, I think that you need to approach data strategically. And if you don't, you're going to waste a lot of money.
yep,
And I think it's as a consultant, as a consulting firm, as a thought leader, it's irresponsible to be kind of like, okay, you know what? I'm going to chase the extra few million dollars in AI and espouse that rather than be like, okay, actually, no, you need to focus on your data quality and your data
hmm
model first and then build it. Um, and so like, I mean, for me, I will always tell a client, I mean, even if I'm in AI pitch, I'll be like, no, you need to do your data strategy first. Like, I don't
yeah.
care. I'm
Well,
not being paid enough to espouse AI
that's
first.
awesome though. I mean, I think that's rare in this industry because the temptation is to definitely grift. I mean, I go to a lot of conferences and I see this all the time where I listen to talks and I have no bloody idea what these people are talking about half the time. I don't think they do either. But one of my really good friends. I mean, she consults big companies as well. She was a former CXO, and she takes a very sober approach to this kind of stuff, where she'll hear about these big companies coming in and you know gaslighting the client about how they need to do AI tomorrow or they'll be out of business, and she takes a much more sober approach to things where it's like, yeah, I mean, same as you, get the data in place. Here's some steps you can do to do this in reality, but don't just jump into it. Don't fire all your workers, just yet. Because you probably need them. But I think also making people aware this stuff it is difficult to do. You don't just sort of jump in. Um, like you saw this at the beginning of 2023, where I think every company was enamored by ChatGPT, for example. And it's like, but it's sort of equivocating, a chatbot interface also with the ability to basically automate every aspect of your company, which, as you know, these aren't the same things at all. But I think that was the
Yeah.
interpretation of this stuff. Like, it just holds this godlike power where you can just transform your business magically overnight because it's AI. In fact, you don't need to do anything because it's smarter than you, so it'll just do it, right? And this is what I've seen sold to people. It's crazy.
Yeah. It reminds me of kind of like a cartoon or something like that, where like, humans create fire and then everyone worships that human that created fire.
Oh
Because it's like
yeah.
it seems like magic. I
That's
mean, I
funny.
don't know if that's an actual cartoon, but it sounds like one. And that's the thing, right? Like these companies like and I think the danger of it, right, is the, the C-suite, the CEOs, CMOs, CFOs, like they're not data experts. They don't know anything that much about data rather than what they see on the news and what they see out there. And like you can't expect them to. They've got a very demanding job. They know a lot
Yeah.
about what they do. And and so when you talk about these things about what it can create and they see like the outputs like ChatGPT, they're like, wow, we could do that. Why don't we do that? And I think there's I think within internally, like it's hard to say no to your boss that we can't do that. And externally, as a consultant, it's hard to say no to a couple $100,000 project because someone else will say yes, right? So I think
Yeah.
there's just like a kind of a yes, yes, yes thing going on. And I think that, I mean, I could say the same thing about startups as well, because I kind of, a couple of years ago, there was a startup for literally everything. And I was just
Oh
getting
yeah.
tired of seeing that because I was just like, you don't need that. Like, no
Are you
one's
talking
going to
about
buy it.
are you talking on the data space or just startups in general?
I mean, data space, especially like the SaaS stuff. I think that's where a lot of the startups are coming out of, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think as far as our attention goes, yeah, that's there was definitely a lot of. I mean, there were a lot of companies getting funded back in the day. I mean, that's no surprise. And if you look at Matt Turup's
Yeah.
Mad Data Landscape, I mean, crap, even this year's edition of it, it was 2,100 logos or something like that, maybe more. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
But I mean, you need like
I use that landscape so much in my newsletter, just being like, look at the state of our data industry right now. Like this is how complex it is. Like, do you expect anyone to understand this? No.
right.
And then people are surprised when you don't understand what technology does. It's like, how can you?
It's insane. It is interesting. I mean, in the midst of all that noise too, I mean, how do you stay focused and coherent and develop a data strategy that's actually going to have legs? Because it seems like there's simultaneously, amongst trying to have a sober view of things, a lot of noise that you have to sift through. I mean, how do you personally uh, focus and divide your attention?
For me, it's really about those stakeholder relationships, especially with business stakeholders. Like having those conversations and really understanding like their problem isn't that they don't have an AI tool. Their problem is that the KPIs of the same metric don't match across three departments.
Mm,
And that's what they face every day. That's what they deal with. And you if you refer back to that and you continue to see like this is how we're going to solve it and you actually prove a solution for what's actually facing them, then you know you're on the right track and then you get the buy-in and they're bought in and they're excited to see this through. And rather beforehand they were just like, oh, we hate the data department because they don't really build us anything relevant. And now they're like, oh, we can actually finally get something. And it's just staying true to that kind of process, right? It's just talking to people and understanding their perspectives and thinking logically and strategically about how to solve these things. And it's not that hard. It's just everyone is so busy that they don't have time to
Yeah.
dedicate to that and they just push that aside.
Yeah. Happens a lot. I think that that's really good though. It seems like you have sort of a sense of a true north that you're driving at, right? I think in this case, the stakeholders and their needs, like that's really cool. And I think it's rare. Uh yeah.
I always find it like I always wonder like why it's so rare though, because I feel like it's pretty straightforward, but I mean, I don't know. Like, do you have perspectives on that? Like why it's rare?
I think empathy's hard,
Hmm.
right? It is hard. I mean, it sounds easy. Like, I mean, again, it's the old tropes, like let's drive value for the stakeholders and stuff. But like ultimately, there's a conflict sometimes I've observed between what stakeholders want and what you might want, or maybe the person helping the stakeholder might want. Take, for instance, consulting, right? Like you want to drive value ideally for the stakeholder, so they have a win, they have a winning situation, and you have a winning outcome for the engagement. Um, but then, especially in consulting, say you have partners attached to this, maybe tech vendors, as an example. Well, now you have a whole suite of other interests, and now combinatorially, it's like there's more egos, more vested interests that maybe aren't necessarily aligned with what the stakeholder needs. And even within organizations, right? When you say stakeholder, often that's actually multiple people. And when you talk about
Yeah.
things like data, I've seen data, it can go two ways. People can be aligned and they can be on the same boat, and then in that case, it's amazing. In other cases, data is very territorial, um, and it's hard to get people to, I would say, align in ways that's going to drive the mission forward. Often people want to do things that are career enhancing, sometimes at the expense of doing the right thing for the business, um, because that's how a lot of people are incentivized, right?
Yeah.
So, and especially when you give the example of like different departments don't even know what's going on in the other department. I mean, okay, it's an extreme misalignment issue that will manifest itself in you probably not even knowing who the stakeholder actually is. You think you know who it is, um, but I don't know. Oftentimes, I found that the real stakeholder is sort of behind the scenes, and you may not be talking to the right person to begin with. This happens a lot.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's a really good answer. That's a really good answer. I like that you mentioned incentives too, because I think that is actually a crux of the problem is we don't really incentivize the right things within organizations. And it's hard to, I mean, I was talking to Shahar, I think
oh
you chat
yeah.
with him a while ago on your podcast, and he turns out to be a neighbor of mine. And we were talking
Oh
about the
no way,
exact same
that's
thing.
awesome.
Yeah, he lives actually down the street in London, which is crazy. But he said like he's worked with people who would like the model might perform 5% better and but they were only incentivized to do 3% that year. So they'd wait and then add the extra 2% the year after.
Yeah,
And you're like, why? And he's like, well, because I'm not incentivized to do it. Like, why not just keep my back pocket and then do it
yeah.
next year and make my life a lot easier? And so yeah, the incentive thing and then everything else you talked about, the multiple stakeholders thing, I think it's a really good answer. I think it's something that is important for everybody to understand about why it's so hard to do data within organizations.
It's real hard. It's so hard. I talk about this often on my podcast, but I'll never forget being at this Chief Data Officer Summit over last December. And it was interesting. I mean, it's just Chief Data Officers from a lot of the biggest companies in the world, and biggest governmental institutions, at least in the US and so forth. And what I found really fascinating was uh, I didn't get the impression that people actually wanted to continue doing this job. There were a lot of I think grievances about he spent months and months and months in alignment meetings with other stakeholders, other C-suites or VPs or directors and so forth, right? Each of whom has an opinion about data, and what often happens is, if you have a data strategy, this other people might find that threatening because it's not their strategy. right? But they happen to have some data that you might need for your strategy. And so there's kingdom building and kingdom loss at stake too, where, okay, you're going to have control over the data that I once had control over, over my dead body. I just need to wait you out because the average tenure of a CDO is only 18 months or 2 years anyway. I've been here for 5, 7 years or more. Like, who are you? I just need to probably not play along with you or give you a lot of resistance, and you'll go somewhere else. This happens.
Yeah. You see it a lot. I mean, one reason when Matt, right, the consulting firm I'm at right now, Brad Kite, got acquired by Accenture, but Brad Kite grew astronomically. And one reason they grew so fast is we did really good work with one team, and then a senior CDO or a senior head of data would go to another team or another company, and then you'd get more and more work that way. But yeah, it's tough, I think, for people because you're constantly banging your head against the wall because your boss doesn't quite understand what you do. And then I think the other thing too is a lot of CDOs and heads of data, they've learned the business side of things. Like they've come to appreciate it and have it a bit more. But a lot of them come from a technical background, right? It's a lot more black and white when you're coding and when you're creating a solution than when you're constantly negotiating with stakeholders who just don't understand it and trying to
Yeah.
make them understand. And that stakeholder management is tough. Like, I mean, I've been in my entire career in consulting, so that's kind of the bread and butter of it. And some days even I'm like, wow, I cannot figure out how to get through to this person and get them to understand what we're doing. And I'm just going to wait out this project, finish it, and then we're never probably going to work with them again. And that
Yeah.
happens, like, even though it doesn't happen that much, but, and you've probably experienced that too, but you can't convince everybody. But with data, you can't convince a lot of people.
It's hard, dude. It's so hard. That's one reason I'm kind of de-emphasizing consulting. One, I feel like I'm finally at a position where I wrote about this recently on LinkedIn, but it's sort of a one-to-one versus one-to-many solution. And I feel like, I'm grateful enough to have a platform and an opportunity to really do one-to-many. So I often felt, I was playing, kind of talking about this earlier, but I felt like a lot of my role was just being a therapist to people, which is great. If you can pay a lot for it, but I just felt like it was the same stories over and over, right? And as you point out, like can't get through to this person, so we'll just conveniently ignore that important thing and move on. But what it means is you're something happens to the project inevitably. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it works really well, and that's awesome to have happen. And other times something happens with the project, which is going to happen at some point. You know the whole thing's going to implode, probably due to a few factors that you've identified, and it's not tech. It's stakeholder related or team related, right? But it just is what it is. I guess you get kind of numb to it after a bit. It's kind of just like being in a war
Yeah.
or something, I guess. But yeah.
Well, especially when you're advising in a more kind of strategic realm, and I'm sure that's mostly what you're doing at this point, right, Joe? Like when you do those consulting relationships, because it's not like they're not calling you to code and do those types of things as
Not
but when you're
anymore.
doing
No.
when you do the strategic stuff, you just don't know what the output is. It's hard to see the output and see the value that comes
Yeah.
out of it. I mean, I've had a couple places where like the data strategy led into more work for the
That's
organization, and then
cool.
you get a little glimpse of your data engineers or your analysts in the organization and spinning up this new data product or this dashboard and actually the business loving it. And then you get to see that and you're like, this is what it's about. This is great. But it is sometimes it's hard to see, especially from a strategic sense, because you don't necessarily have that vantage point and that perspective.
Mhm. That's a really good point. I mean, so walk me through this. What are some tips for the audience you can give to work with stakeholders, and try and get through to them? Have you found anything that works?
Yeah, like so I mean when I do interviews and it was funny because I jumped on this project last minute and I did some discovery interviews for this and someone was watching on our team and they're like, wow, that was completely different than how we've done it before, but that got to the crux of the problem. And what you really need to ask and what you really need to do is put yourself in that stakeholder's shoes and really understand what they do, not what they want. It doesn't matter what they want, it's what they do. as a marketing professional, I do X. I need to understand the KPIs. I need to understand the cost per clicks. I need to understand the marketing revenue. And then as the data professional, that's the first question I ask, what do you do? And then I ask kind of like, what are your KPIs? As they mentioned, the cost per click. Okay, how do you get that? How would you normally get that? And they're like, oh, well, I get it from a pull Excel, whatever. And they're like, how can we make that easier for you? And they're like, well, I don't know. And then you hypothesize together and figure out what that solution is together and do that interview process, do that workshop because you are the data person. You know how to build a dashboard. You know how to build these things. You can lend that experience. They lend the experience of like what they need. And then they actually get bought in and they're kind of, it's fun to co-create, right? And then once you have that session, keep them updated, play stuff back and be like, this is where we're going with this. But at the same time, set limits, set boundaries because you could have KPI sprawl all over the place
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But it's really about not what the stakeholder wants, but what the stakeholder does and what they need. And I think that mindset shift, if you can take that on and you can think about that, that will help create so many more opportunities. You'll be seen as an ally rather than just someone else who sometimes builds things that I don't use.
Mm. That's such a key distinction. That's such a key distinction.
That's what people ask. Like every time they go
Yeah.
into a discovery interview, they say, "What do you want?" And the person is not a data person, so they're not going to say the right thing. They're going to say, "Oh, I want ChatGPT for my dashboard." That's not what they
Yeah.
want, and that's not what you're going to build, right?
Well, you might. Um,
Yeah, and then half a year later they'll be shut down because they have cost overruns and it doesn't actually perform well.
yeah, it gives like horrible advice. And um, so about your newsletter, how long you been doing it?
So I started in April.
Nice.
It's a topic I've thought about for a while. So the gist of it is it's called the data ecosystem. And how I define an ecosystem is not how every other company defines an ecosystem. They say data ecosystem is all the technologies in there. I think it's more than that. It's everything that we talked about today. It's the processes that underpin it. It's the relationships between different domains and stuff. It's the org structure and operating model. And so the goal of the data ecosystem newsletter is every week to dive into a different topic within data and dive into what it is, why it's important for you to understand it, and kind of how to approach it strategically and how to approach it. And the goal of it is really kind of give everybody and anybody a Coles Notes or what's the American version or Cliff's Notes, I guess,
Yeah, Cliff Notes would do
of
that.
of
Yep.
yeah, Cliff's Notes of that data domain, that data area. And it's Coles Notes in Canada, so that's why I said Coles Notes. But like for
Interesting.
example, I mean, I did one on data modeling and it went really well.
Yeah, it was good.
A- and yeah, it was just like it's not going into the amount of detail that you get if you bought a data modeling book, but it's saying like what's conceptual modeling, what's logical, what's physical, and what are different approaches.
Yep.
And that's sometimes all you need to know to just kind of bridge that gap and talk to the stakeholder or think about how do we actually approach this and like, oh, this is why the business process is kind of emulated within the data model.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's the jive in the newsletter. And like, I mean, over the past kind of couple months, it's starting to grow like crazy. So I'm really, really proud of it. I'm really happy about it. And yeah.
Super cool. Like, why did you do a newsletter? Why not do TikTok or YouTube or something?
I like writing. I think writing is in its purest form. It's something that you can read and you can digest. And I also am not. If you've looked at my LinkedIn, I think there's maybe like 3 pictures of me in my entire 2.5 years of posting on LinkedIn. I'm not someone who likes to go on camera or post selfies or anything. Um, and I think for me, like I really enjoy breaking down the complex into simplification and simplify the complex. And I think writing is one of the best ways and forms to do that. And I mean, yeah, so newsletter made sense. And I mean, the end goal of this newsletter is probably actually a book that will kind of bring all this stuff
That's
together
cool.
and kind of be that Cliff's notes for data from that strategic sense of the ecosystem. But the newsletter lets me approach that week by week because each of these topics is really hard to understand. And the reason why I think no one's really approached it from this perspective is like you have your domain experience in one area. If
Yeah.
you're an analytics person, you don't understand platform architecture and you don't understand business strategy. So like, how can someone speak to all these different things? And that's what I'm trying to tackle. So it's a lot of research, it's a lot of work, and like, but there's so many good experts out there, so much good stuff, especially Substack and Medium, and it's just about finding it and turning it into insights.
Oh yeah,
Because
you've been prolific. There's a lot here. I mean, I'm going through
ChatGPT will
your,
only give you the foundation.
well, it will, and I think that it'll give you a foundation, and I also feel like ChatGPT's, I mean, I use it all the time more to chat with it, like just about ideas. I think it's
Yeah.
got good things to say, but writing is one of those things where it helps you, I think through the topic in a way that chatbots or even making video probably won't. And I say this as a person who has, several cameras in my studio where I record a lot. But writing is it's thinking. Um, I think it'd be an awesome book, actually. If you ever need a publisher for that, let me know.
Yeah, we'll chat about it at some point
Yeah,
soon.
that'd be good. Yeah, it gets good. I mean, the thing is, a Substack. I'm doing this my own book that's coming out. Is like, it gives you a chance to test the ideas and see what works. I feel like the book writing process with a traditional publisher can be very waterfall and monolithic, where it doesn't
Hmm.
get early reviews, or if it is, it's like on the publisher's platform, so only people with access to that platform get it. So inherently, the audience is a bit lower than you would want. Whereas if you're very public with your ideas like you are, um, some ideas will stick, some ideas people will beat the crap out of them, and I think that at the end of the day, that improves you in a very low cost way. Maybe high cost to your ego if you're sensitive to these things, but you don't seem like you are. So
When you've been posting on LinkedIn for 2.5 years, you kind of get over it pretty quick. But no, exactly. And I think
yeah,
that's the beauty of it. Like, I mean, for that modeling article, for example, like I put out and I said Beam was a type of modeling. And someone's like, no, Beam is a process that gets you to a Kimball star schema. And I'm like,
yeah.
oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Like I did research, but you're gonna miss things. And that's the process of me learning because I'm not an expert in all these things, but there are experts out there and they will talk to you and they'll tell you like, no, this is the way it is. And you're like, good, now I know, and now I can incorporate that. And that stuff is people don't do enough of it. They don't really take in feedback and really seek it out. And it is one reason why a lot of people stall in their careers is because they're good at what they do, but they don't know what they need to do to get to that next stage.
Oh, it's incredibly hard. I think for a lot of reasons. That is that old. Let me see if I can find the quote. I always butcher it. Uh, Yeah, I mean it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. It's from Upton Sinclair.
I love
I think
that.
it's
I
one of
like
the
that.
golden rules of the universe, though, is that quote. It goes back to incentives and outcomes, where if you're incentivized to ignore something, and this happens a lot, right? I think I see this with people who work for vendors, for example. It's like the damnedest thing where people will whatever technology they're selling, for example, especially you talk to salespeople, like whatever they're selling at the moment is like the best tool ever. And the moment they leave the company and go to the next one, well, that's the best tool that you need. Sometimes it's for the competitor, and you're just like, weren't you just saying that the product that you're now selling was like total garbage a bit ago, but now it's awesome. Um, but you can
Yeah,
conveniently
it's like
ignore
they
the
had a
fact that,
revelation.
yeah,
They're struck by lightning.
yeah, yeah, it's
Or
it's hilarious.
struck by a bigger paycheck. That's probably what it was.
That's how it happens. More money or more whatever. But it's hilarious. We see this a lot in the industry, and I think there's a lot of and context switching is really hard. So I think a lot of people just ignore it because it's like you're getting paid to do the job you're getting paid to do, not to explore the outer bounds of the industry and all that. So just
Yeah.
or it's people just don't have the bandwidth. But it's really good that you're doing this newsletter, and I will add it to the show notes obviously because I think it's what you're doing is hard. Um, it's ain't easy.
No, no, I appreciate it. And yeah, no, it's tough, but it is fun. And like I think like posting on LinkedIn was fun for the first while, but after a while you kind of get a bit tired of the short form and stuff. And I mean for me I do once a day. I'm not like posting my thoughts type of thing. Um but the newsletters kind of made me enjoy learning and understanding these things. So I'm learning about new things I don't know, right? And I think that that passion for data and that constant wanting to learn new things, that's really I love seeing that in people, especially that I work with, especially within data and teams. It's when you see that it really is fun. And it's one reason why I love going to data conferences, having drinks with people like you and everything, because it is that passion and that feel
Mhm.
for what else can we figure out? What else can we do? How do we make this better?
Oh yeah, yeah. We have fun conversations in London. I remember.
Yeah,
It's a good old time. Are you going to be at a big data London?
I will be there, and I think you will be as well.
I'm supposed to be there. Yes. So I think
Is
I'll be
that
in
your first
trouble.
travel to Europe? Your next travel to Europe, anyway?
My next one, yeah, I would definitely say not my
Yeah.
first. I can
Well,
pretend it
no, I meant
is.
yeah, obviously.
Um, I can pretend I should just go into full tourist mode when I'm there next time, and um, I don't even know what the typical tourist things to do in London are, but maybe I'll.
Well, I can see your climbing shirt. We can go climbing when you're here if you want.
Oh, you climb? We talked about. It. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, I boulder. And there's a place in London called the Castle, and it's literally a castle, and it's got a bouldering and top ropes area within. I actually took Annie there. Annie
Oh, yeah, Nelson. Oh,
Nelson.
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, she's supposed to. I was gonna go meet with her up in Wyoming to go climb over the weekend, but we'll see. Yeah, that's cool. Climbing's one of those things I notice that more and more people, if you talk to them, they're like, "Oh yeah, I climb." It's it's hilarious. So, well, awesome, Dylan. Yeah, I'll bring my I'll try and remember to pack my shoes, my climbing shoes, that is. So, because after London, I'm going straight to Australia and New Zealand, so I kind of want to have that
Yeah, you
handy.
might need the space. You can rent.
Ew, I hate renting shoes though. It's so gross.
It's
Um,
true, it's true.
yeah, and they suck too. The rental shoes. No offense if you're into rental shoes. Anyone in the audience there, but I think they're garbage. Like the rubber on them just sucks. It's everything about them.
I agree.
I used them once at Dog Patch Boulders over in San Francisco, and I was like, this is the last time I'm ever using rental shoes. These things are. So I think a few months ago, I was in Santa Clara, California at Movement, and I just like I'll just buy shoes. Like I can't wear rentals.
You can't be bothered.
You just can't climb. You can't climb to save your life in these things. I mean, you might as well be wearing like hotel slippers or something. It's like it just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, they're like skates.
They are, yeah. What kind of shoes you wear?
I have Scarpa. I bought one pair of Scarpa and I really love them. And I bought like a more intermediate pair
Nice.
and
Scarpas are good.
I absolutely love them. Yeah, they're painful as hell to put on, but they work.
That means they're working if you're in utter pain doing it. Yeah, my
Exactly.
son's favorite he likes Scarpas too. He's his favorites are the Dragos. He
Mm.
has a lot of climbing comp stuff. So well, awesome, dude.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's cool.
yeah, yeah. Uh, So yeah, great chatting with you. For people who want to find you, how can they do that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, Dylan Anderson. I'm the one with the bow tie in the picture. And
Very very
if you want
snazzy.
to connect with me, if you want to connect with me, please just drop a note in the connection request because I have over 2,000 connections open that I don't necessarily respond to if it just doesn't have a note. So yeah, and then the other one is the data ecosystem newsletter on Substack. Go and subscribe, comment, like I'm always interested to hear people's feedback and opinions and also suggestions for other topics because I'm making my way through the data ecosystem one topic at a time. And if there's ones that are on your mind, happy to delve into it.
Awesome. Let me see what you've done here so far. I might have a topic to um I don't think you've talked about decentralization or decentralization, but I think that that would be a topic to discuss. I keep seeing that pop up a lot. So
Depending on when this comes out, my next articles are on taking technology a strategy to your technology stack. So actually approaching your technology stack with strategically. Then it's what's in the technology landscape and what exists out there, And then to your point, it's about platforms. And first, what is a data platform? And then secondly, how do you actually structure and build your data platform? And there we get into kind of decentralization and that whole data mesh realm, which is just such a fun topic.
Yeah, it is. It's be a bit controversial, but you
But
should write about it.
I'll be sure to mention you when I write that, Joe.
Okay. Thank you. Well, awesome. Yeah, it's good chatting with you. We'll see you in London.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Yeah. See you in London. Cheers. Have a good rest of your
Later.
summer.
Thank you.